Hey, so I would like to welcome you to this webinar hosted by Axinom and Caretta Research. We would like to talk today a little bit about the topic of build or buy and cover there the strategies and the drivers when it comes to sourcing of OTT technology. Before we get started there, Tom and I would like to just quickly introduce ourselves. My name is Stefanie. I am the Chief Commercial Officer at Axinom. I'm responsible for our strategy on the OTT market and have been working with major brands on the market for many years. And this build or buy topic has been one of the main drivers for me and also for Axinom in general when we decide how to build our product and how to work together with media companies. So I'm happy today to talk about this topic and discuss with Tom what it means for the media industry. And I right now realize I forgot to mention, if you have questions, please feel free to use the chat and we will see them and we'll be happy to answer them in the end of the webinar. Handing over to Tom.
Great. Thanks, Steffi. My name's Tom Morrod, and it's a pleasure to be able to speak with you today about this research that we conducted with Axinom over the past few months. So I work for a company called Caretta Research. I'm one of the founders of that business. We're a research and consultancy company doing media tech specific research, looking at product strategy on behalf of vendors and how you can get to market better with your products. And on behalf of buyers, we're helping to position product selection and product strategy, technology product strategy.
Okay, so let's get started. And I would like to say just a few words on why we even talk about this study. The build or buy topic is a critical topic for the industry. From our point of view, it's a topic which, technology in general and how to decide on technology, which technology to pick, and how to decide on what you build in-house and what you outsource, with which vendors you work together. All these technology decisions are already key for success, but they will become in the future even more key to success. And we see that topic as a crucial topic in the industry, but still it's not so well investigated and covered in the studies you see on the market. So this is why we wanted to cover the topic together with Caretta Research. And we wanted to look a little bit into what are the drivers for decisions, what experiences media companies already have in this space and in this topic, and what are also the preferences or topics they consider when they make decisions in the future. And this is why we were working together on this research. When we talk a little bit about the frame, the methodology of the study, we had over 270 people who joined the survey, also additionally 10 in-depth interviews. And the participants in the study were all people from major media companies, which means broadcasting companies, telecommunication companies, also OTT streaming companies. The split between companies coming from the traditional broadcasting world and coming from the streaming first world is around about 50-50. From the people which were answering, around 60% were executives, 25% are from tech teams, and 15% are from product and marketing teams. And when we talk about the regions, it was 45% from EMEA, 30% Americas, and 25% Asia Pacific. So it's covering the global market. And we would like now to dive into the key findings of this study. And Tom will guide you through that presentation and look a little bit into what we found out.
Great. Thanks very much, Steffi. So it's my pleasure to talk you through a few slides on what we found in this research. And as Steffi mentioned earlier, if there are any questions, please put them into the chat and we'll address them towards the end. And if we don't have a chance to get to them, then we'll, of course, follow up afterwards. So just to give you kind of a big overview of what we were reviewing in this survey, it was a B2B conducted survey. We put it online, and we got those 270 respondents that Steffi mentioned. We also did a lot of research around this topic, and so I'm going to kind of give you a broader view of what's happening in the industry. A few things that aren't in the report that's published. So there is a report that's accompanying this, and I think there'll be an email coming out to everyone who's joined the call, and of course the people who aren't able to join it also, I'm sure, get an email linking to that report. So I encourage you to download it. It's a good report. I'm involved in it, so I think it's an excellent report. And there are some things in this deck that are going beyond what's in that report. So if there are questions about either what's in the report directly or what's in this presentation, please come to either myself or Steffi. Our emails are at the back of the presentation, and we'll be happy to help. So let's just have a quick look first at the big picture of the industry. So the framing of what we're looking at here is the online streaming technology market. So all of the technology elements that are bought by companies for online streaming capabilities. And the companies that we were talking to in these surveys were broadcasters, pay TV operators, and OTT companies predominantly. And what we were interested in is how do they buy and procure technology and implement technology in order to drive their OTT streaming capabilities. But there is a broader view of this, which is what's happening in the market. So how much of this technology is actually being bought in general. And we can look at that separately by reviewing all of the vendors that are providing online streaming technology, and particularly looking at those that are providing it in a platform. So an OVP. I'm sure all of you know what an OVP is, although it's hard to define, and we have tried our best. So these are all platforms that are packaging up things like encoding, front-end personalization, metadata management, monetization, entitlement, the platform API and middleware that interacts between the back end and the front end, content protection, DRM, and ad tech elements. So all of those parts of the OVP are the things that we're reviewing through the course of this survey. And overall, when we look at the market from the vendor perspective, it's a growing market. There's more money being transacted by the buyers of these technologies. And we're expecting that to continue growing. And we've got a broad idea of how that splits into the main elements of that market. So a lot of that spend is going into the encoding and packaging chain. And then you can kind of see in this graphic on the right-hand side that there's just kind of halo effect of all of these other elements that are bought as part of that platform. And this is kind of a general broad view of it. But I think the story from the vendor perspective is there's more money coming in, there's more spend. And so we see at a macro level interest in buying platforms that drive streaming technology. So let's look at it from the survey perspective, which is the buyer perspective. And I think that's a good framing for how we can kind of put these two stories side by side. And when we ran this survey, we asked, as you do in a survey, a load of questions, and then we cross-cut a lot of the analysis. We got quite a lot of responses, so we were able to do some quite detailed analysis, and it comes out with some really interesting stories. And I'm just going to try and highlight the key stories that we found. So one of the big stories that I'd like to take out of this, and I think is really important, if you're a buyer of streaming technology, is that the driving force for a lot of buyer decisions is that you want to buy flexibility and customization ability. So you want to be able to have some level of certainty that you can control the future roadmap of your platform. If it's an OTT streaming platform or a default platform, kind of a TV everywhere platform, you want to know that in the future, you're going to be able to customize and modularize that platform to do the things that you want to do in the future. And that comes through a few different kind of key metrics that I'll evidence in just a moment. So the first of them is that almost all buyers are using lots of different vendors. There are very few, relatively few, that are using a single vendor to do everything. And there are even fewer that are doing everything in-house. Most companies are either using a load of different vendors and putting pieces together, or they have a mix of vendor components and in-house development. And in that deployment, they will be almost certainly customizing a lot of that. So it's not that very few companies are dropping components directly into a stack and just leaving them as they are. There's a lot of customization, a lot of nuance in how those are actually deployed. And I think that kind of bridges the gap between purely building everything and purely buying everything. And I think that's kind of the key finding from all of this is it's very easy. And I came into the study thinking, okay, we'll talk about build at one end and buy at the other end. But actually what we're really talking about is all the stuff in the middle. It's a very complicated market of a bit of build and a bit of buy. And you're typically finding things like lots of vendor components that are plugged together in various ways, often in-house, or a mix of in-house development and vendor components, lots of customization in all of this, lots of demand for flexibility. So that's kind of the landscape that we end up with. Next thing along, the demand for customization ability and integration, APIs linking those different components together is really critically important. It's the most important technical consideration when deciding which technologies to buy. So either as a vendor, you're looking at, you have to make sure that you have all of your components that can be plugged together with other components, or as a buyer, you want to make sure that you can fit things together the way you want to, that either they fit into bits of your existing stack, or you can be more modular and plug and play as you develop things in the future. So all of this points towards something that we hear a lot from the buyers when we talk to them. Nobody wants to be locked into a particular stack for a very long period of time. They want to have that. They want to feel like they own the roadmap. So let's evidence a few of those things just so people can see the kind of the sourcing of all of this. When we asked buyers how they wanted to, how they preferred to buy technologies, whether it was from a mix of vendors or in-house or however it was, the response that we got was, as I mentioned, very much towards buying from multiple vendors as the first option, or hybrid mix of in-house and vendor components. So we have those two approaches that are very, very common. Using a single vendor is quite uncommon and really is particular to smaller companies that are buying an end-to-end stack, or to very, very small selection of very large companies that really own the roadmap of a particular OVP. And if you're lucky enough to be in that, that rarefied group, then so be it. But I think most companies are not. So, 99% of companies will not be driving the roadmap of their vendors directly. When we look at the customization ability, so how you can customize components, this really this is where the story gets a little bit deeper. I think a lot more interesting, because almost everybody is deploying a customized version of something. And they either have a development team in-house that spends a lot of time doing the integration, implementation, and customization of vendor components, or building their own components, maybe from open source, for example, in order to plug gaps or to focus on particularly important strategic technologies that they want to own in-house, or they're asking the vendor to do a level of customization for them. And this changes based on what type of deployment you have. So if you're buying everything from a single vendor, you're much less likely to be doing a lot of in-house customization, because you tend to be less sophisticated type of buyer. If you're buying from a lot of different vendors, then you obviously have to do quite a lot of customization. And there's very, very few cases where there's lots of different vendors involved, where there's, off-the-shelf components just dropped in, because there needs to be a lot of integration, customization to make them fit. And in this case, where there's kind of a hybrid mix of in-house development and vendor components, that's where we sometimes see vendor components kind of dropped in around stuff that's being developed in-house. And so it really depends on what kind of approach you take, what kind of company you are, as to how you best kind of develop your your customization approach. But this is kind of one of the bridges between build and buy, and we see almost all companies somewhere on that path. What technical considerations are most important? So this is that last number that we saw. Integrations and APIs, flexibility and ability to customize are all very important to everyone that we talk to. It's the highest scoring on this. Whereas some other factors that are more kind of that we know are very commercially important, like time to market, are ranked a little bit lower. And things that we thought would be ranked much higher, such as modularity and documentation and know-how, those are really kind of proxied for flexibility and customization in many ways. So if you don't need to have a system necessarily that has lots of documentation or modularity, if you have some other way of gaining that flexibility. Although, to be honest, those are very good ways to make sure that you do have some flexibility in future in your system. So we see these kind of things as, this is the terminology that buyers are using, and the way that they're looking, the prism that they're looking at the world through. They want to be able to control their roadmap, control their integrations and technology strategy, and they need to have the flexibility in order to know they can roll that out over a longer period of time. So let's have a look at the decisions that buyers are making, maybe more from a commercial point of view, what type of approach they like to take when they're procuring technology, and what factors drive their decision making in terms of what they'd like to control. So we found that 50% of the respondents preferred to buy products as either pay-as-you-go or open source. So pay-as-you-go is broadly associated with SaaS. Open source is obviously open source, and so this was the single most preferred way of buying products out of the range of different options that we've provided. 70% plus said that costs are avoiding vendor dependency were the top commercial concerns, and 45%, which was by far the largest proportion, listed controlling the development roadmap as the top reason to bring development in-house rather than go out through to a partner. Again, let's kind of go through those in a little bit more time. So buyers tended to cluster around different strategies for buying technologies. So if you preferred to buy through pay-as-you-go, you tended to have a different setup. You tended to have more of a hybrid mix of in-house development plus some vendors. You tended to do more vendor integration work and have a larger development team. And so we have we can see strategies pooling around this kind of preferred way of buying. And this seems like this pay-as-you-go approach seems like the most fertile territory for a lot of vendors at the moment, because that's how buyers like to buy. And so as a buyer, if you want to have a pay-as-you-go strategy with your vendors, and you have a development team that is tending towards dealing with integrations, you like that kind of hybrid mix of integration and vendor components, then this tends to tie together a technical strategy that makes sense. Whereas with companies, buyers that have more of a tendency towards open source, they will have much more of a kind of heavy dependency on an internal development team. They'll tend to have fewer developers working on things like maintenance and more developers working on things like back end. And so they're just a different structure of approach in many cases. And we see things like, traditional software license and subscription or upfront purchases, forever licenses, for example, and full services or even managed services being a little bit less preferred from the panel that we talked to. So we're kind of seeing this tendency towards either an open source approach, which is more associated with building more things, let's say, versus a pay-as-you-go approach, which is more of a SaaS-oriented view of the world, and that is more associated with buying more things. The commercial considerations that we found buyers to be buyers found to be most important. I think this is quite clear as well, is cost, and something we can always predict that cost is going to be a very important factor. And then vendor lock-in and vendor dependency. So there's a great fear amongst the buyer community of being locked into a particular vendor relationship and can't develop in the way that's needed to map their own consumer product roadmap. And so being able to navigate that concern, which is often mitigated through things like flexibility, customization ability, so all of the factors that we talked about before, which are more technical considerations, they actually manage the commercial concerns that many buyers have anyway. Whereas things like difficulty in hiring in-house developer teams doesn't seem to be as much of a factor as we expected. And the requirements of a vendor to be in a particular region, have a particular, understanding of the local culture or local market, that's becoming less important, particularly as we migrate towards a world of cloud SaaS products, which are all much the same deployed, regardless of where you are. So you don't need to have an engineer coming in and plugging stuff in locally as much anymore, because you have a different set of architecture, which allows you to plug in components globally from the same kind of core backbone of infrastructure. So again, this kind of tends towards the same story of vendors wanting to have, buyers wanting to have control of their roadmap and being able to avoid commercial friction with their vendors by not being locked into particularly long contracts or particular end-to-end solutions that don't have the flexibility in order to develop with their roadmap. So, a good example of this is that front-end components tends to have a much shorter life cycle than back-end components. And so if you tie those together, then you end up with friction about halfway through the natural cycle of replacing the back end, because the front-end components would naturally cycle at a faster rate. And looking at the kind of the requirements, the drivers to build in-house rather than to buy, this all speaks again to the same big picture, the same big story. Controlling that development roadmap is really important for buyers. They want to know that their product strategy is going to be possible in future, whatever that happens to be. And as they define that and change what's needed for their consumer market, need to be able to, that needs to be something that can be followed by the vendors that you have, that you're using. If you look further down this list, there are just other ways of staying controlled. So in general, we find that buyers want to have control over more and more aspects of their technology strategy, because it's critical for them to be commercially successful, that they have control over those elements. And the way that control manifests from a technology perspective is having good vendors who can provide solutions that are flexible and modular and all of those things that we talked about. But not all components are made equal. And so I think this for me was the most interesting part of the study, because it's where we get into kind of the real detail. And so we found that there were different types of components that had different life cycles and expectations and kind of natural tendencies to be built or bought. And that's what we kind of can study here in this next section. There are components that are more differentiating to a consumer, so things that are more towards the front end, such as apps, personalization, metadata management, the platform API that links the back end to the front end and drives a lot of Rails management and things like that, and ad tech and implementation of ad tech. And those products are more likely to be built and more likely to be rapidly upgraded and cycled than some of the other products that we looked at. Heavily commoditized products and processes such as encoding, DRM, are much more likely products to be bought, and their median level of upgrade likeliness and then systems that you don't want to touch very often, so not upgraded or changed very often, things like entitlement and monetization, are really a bit of a mix, whether they're built in-house or bought from vendors, but they are much, much less likely to be upgraded. I think this starts to tease apart the story of how an end-to-end system really manifests over a longer period of time. There's tension. You want to change this part or this part, but maybe leave this part alone. And you need to have that capability to run systems over a period of time like that, because that's how, that's the requirement for making sure that that system is the most appropriate for the customers, the end user. And this tension comes up time and time again if there isn't that flexibility built into the vendors that you've selected. So let's have a look at what that actually looks like in terms of numbers. This is my favorite infographic-y type slide that we have. So, and I'm going to show this in a slightly different way in a moment. So all of these kind of different components, they can either be, so the number that you're seeing on each of these, just for the geeks in the room, plan to upgrade is the number in blue. And then the top bar is deployed mostly with a vendor. The middle is deployed with a mix of in-house and vendors, and the bottom is mostly deployed in-house. So you can see there's kind of some tendencies as you go towards the right and bottom of this graphic. We have things that are more likely to be upgraded and more likely to be in-house. And I'll show that in a slightly different way here. And those will tend to be towards the front end and differentiating the consumer experience. So these are the different topics that we talked about through this survey. Entitlement, monetization, which kind of we find kind of sit together, encoding, packaging, content protection, and DRM, which are kind of the back-end video related components, and then ad tech, personalization, recommendation, video and metadata management, and the platform API and middleware, which manages the interaction between the front end and the back end, and then the front end elements like the apps and UI. So those are the different parts that we looked at. The core kind of commercial components, entitlement and monetization, tend to be on a very slow upgrade cycle, so they're the least likely to be upgraded. And this was a plan to upgrade in the next 2 years. So these ones are upgraded the least frequently. The commoditized kind of video related components like encoding and DRM are have a medium likelihood to be upgraded, but they're much more likely to be with vendors. And then all of the front end stuff you can see is quite regularly upgraded, because it's the stuff that the end user is seeing all the time. It's the stuff that makes a difference, whether you can prevent churn or drive consumption or things like that. So you need to, again, framing this in terms of technology procurement strategy, whatever you build in the back has to be able to support this different cycle of upgrade and this different propensity to have some things with vendors and some things in-house. Because this is, if you can't manage that mix of things, then you're going to find tension at some point. So this just frames all of that in a graphical way. And this gives us our kind of 3 clusters. Once again, we have those kind of core business management tools, entitlement, monetization, which are least likely to be upgraded, reasonably likely to be built. We have encoding, packaging, and content protection related things, which are more commoditized and are most often bought from vendors. And then we have all of that kind of a mix of different more front-end focused things, ad tech, personalization, metadata related, platform API and front end, which are more likely to be built or tending towards being built, and are very likely to be upgraded. So being able to support this mix, again, it introduces tension. It's something that we see all the time talking with buyers that have deployed, relatively end-to-end and inflexible OVPs. There's some tension that they want to change the apps, but they can't, and they want to leave the back end the same. But in order to change the apps, they're going to have to change the back end because they're going to have to break the system. So that kind of thing does come up. So let's move through to what buyers should be doing. So the big factors that come out of this: flexibility, customization, and control. These are the big critical decision factors that came across in all of the ways that we framed all of these questions. And I would make a few kind of big comments to buyers. It's very common to mix vendors in-house. In fact, it's very unusual to go with a single vendor or to try to do everything in-house. That's not how the complexity of these systems tends to actually deployed. And within that, there's also a huge level of customization, both from the vendor and in-house. And that bridges the decision between build and buy. So you're always kind of in the middle of doing both. And what you're really aiming for through that is to control your product roadmap, control your capabilities, and do that by having a level of flexibility, customization ability, control, and ultimately trust in the vendors that we're using in order to follow through on your roadmap with their roadmap. The second point, prioritizing investment decisions for video streaming technologies. It depends on what part of the stack you're focusing on. And again, it's quite difficult to say, do everything end to end with one big system, because we can see that there are different cycles for different component types. So you want to perhaps differentiate your user experience and focus on certain components there, while maybe not building in-house some of the commoditized capabilities which are very easily available from the vendor community and probably aren't worth investing on reinventing the wheel. So you can cut up your decisions where it makes sense, and you can do that over a period of time based on those upgrade cycles. So you don't have to say, I'm buying everything now from one vendor, for example. You can buy this bit from one vendor, build some bits in-house, buy other bits from other vendors, and plug it all together. And that seems much more in line with what we find from this survey as the best practice. And so that kind of best approach to frame it that way is that there's a mix. It's going to depend on who you are, which type of buyer you are, how big your dev team is, how much investment you want to put into this. But ultimately, there are very few cases where we found that buyers had taken a strong single position to do everything in-house or to do everything through one vendor. And in reality, it's a mix, and you do a bit of both, and it's about managing how you do that best for your particular capabilities and requirements. So you're very likely to be doing both anyway. You're very likely to be working with a mix of different vendors and some in-house development resources, and focusing your time and energies on the bits of that make the most sense. Taking risks where you can upgrade things faster in future and cycle things faster in future makes sense. And also there was a strong feedback to go with what you know. So if you have lots of developers in-house, then use them. And if you don't, then ask your vendors to help, because most vendors will do levels of customization, as we saw already. So a graphical representation of that is you're probably going to be doing this oscillation over time between building and buying. This is a version of a graphic that I've used for about 15 years, and it's still true. And I will still talk I have conversations with buyers every few months, and someone will say, we decided to build everything in-house, and then once we worked it out, we decided to outsource it because it's really complicated to manage. And then once we outsourced it, we got frustrated that we couldn't do this one thing, so we decided to bring it back in-house, and there's this kind of oscillation. And the middle ground, again, is finding the mix where you can maintain the level of flexibility and control over a longer period of time, and that sits in the middle. And so the result of this survey is that middle ground is much larger and much more well understood than I was expecting before we did this survey. Anyway, so what could we learn from the buyers that have gone and built a lot of stuff in-house? You can control everything. You can develop a lot of in-house expertise, and you can certainly differentiate if you do things correctly. So there are a set of really good reasons to go ahead and build a lot of things in-house, but it is expensive, and you have to manage all of those development resources, and you're going to require different development resources to build and to maintain. You're very likely to be slower to market. I've heard some buyers say that they are the same speed to market or faster to market, but I have found in every case many vendors who will be much faster than that. So I think it's often the case of looking around for the right vendor that can get you to market in the right amount of time while giving the right amount of customization and versioning of what you want. And then I think it's important to kind of reflect on the fact that for a lot of technologies, they are problem solved, and it's questionable about how much value there is in reinventing a proprietary version of a wheel, or implementing a version of open source that can be just bought off the shelf. And the reason we say that is not to push everyone towards buying more stuff from vendors. It's just that there are often, unless you're at a very large scale, most buyers don't commercially benefit or technically benefit from that approach, because there is almost always going to be a good fit vendor that's providing that solution prepackaged. And so we have quotes like, we did everything in-house, we hired hundreds of developers, we got exactly what we wanted, and then now we know what we want, we're going and looking for a vendor. But there are good reasons why you do things in-house, because you want to learn what's valuable before you go and look for that vendor, or whatever other things that drive you to want to control that before you then go and seek that same level of control through the vendor community as well. What can we learn if we look at it the other way? And I hear more complaints this side of the market than the we built everything in-house side of the market. If you buy end-to-end, it can be very fast. There are plenty of vendors that will tell you that you can be deployed in hours or days or weeks, and it is definitely a way of getting out to market very quickly. It can be very predictable in terms of costs, and you can learn a lot. You can gain a lot of best practice from the market, because a vendor will be working with many other buyers, and they will be taking feedback into their roadmap, and they will often also share levels of analytics so that you have benchmarking across different buyers that are similar. And I think all of that is very valuable. However, unless you are kind of the top of the list for that particular vendor, you will often not have very much control of the roadmap. And this is, again, a complaint we hear time and time again talking with buyers. You have to compromise on that control. And ultimately, it's harder to differentiate because you're using a reasonably templated or stock version of something. And as you kind of flex away from buying something that is end-to-end towards something that is more customized, you start to lose those benefits. So the costs become more variable. You start to have to make a lot more decisions of your own, and you're much slower to market. And then you have a complicated managed service solution, and maybe you do control the roadmap, but you have kind of lost a lot of the easy to implement benefits of end-to-end and kind of move towards something that's more in the middle ground anyway. So there's a lot of quotes here that I think my favorite one is, our vendor roadmap is driven by their biggest customer, and we do not share their priorities. So I think, and that kind of comes across quite often. There are ways to mitigate this, but so looking for things like access to access into the development roadmap, access to the design team. Those are really quite important factors when talking with a vendor, because that gives you a way to pull on some of these levers that otherwise are out of reach. But the tension that we see from an end-to-end purchase is very, very common. So what can we learn from all of this put together? Well, as I said at the beginning, I kind of expected when we started this that we would have these two kind of polarized views of the world, and that would be a relatively, we'd be fighting one against the other. But in reality, there is a lot of middle ground, which is actually where most companies end up, most buyers end up, where there's some ability to control the differentiating features without investing too much in the commoditized technology, and finding a best fit strategy that allows you to use development resources you have and to focus on what's necessary to be successful in your market with your product. And so the difficulties in that approach are all around, how do I get the balance right? How do I work out which, what level of customization should I do? What level of control should I do? Which components should I be focusing on? And having a technical foundation that allows for this kind of longer term development and flexibility and customization ability of that stack, so that you can deal with the tensions that will naturally come up as you want to develop parts of your stack faster than others, and you want to change parts of your strategy in order to respond to the requirements in the market. So getting that kind of balance right and getting that technical foundation in order to support that is really what's kind of critical underpinning this. And you're going to end up somewhere in the middle, most likely anyway. So these are kind of the key considerations when you're looking for the right place to land. I hope that was helpful. I'll hand back over to Steffi, and I'll be taking questions towards the end.
Thanks, Tom. I would like to continue a little bit on what does that mean. We learned a lot around building completely from scratch, comes with upsides, comes with downsides, buying everything from vendors. Same here. We heard that over many, many years, companies are already trying both ways and trying then the other way. And we see that actually you need to be in between. You need both. You need build and buy. And it's actually, as Tom said, about how to balance that and how to make it work. And we saw in the result as well that it's the most important thing to distinguish where do you actually want to build and where do you want to buy, because it's quite different per component of your OTT platform. And when you make these considerations, I think on the one hand, it's of course technology driven. You need to think about how to keep control of your platform, how to keep control of technology choices, but at the same time staying connected to market developments, maybe not missing out on parts which are on the market already commoditized and you don't want to reinvent the wheel. And on the other hand, from the business side, thinking about how can you easily and fast adapt to what you might see as a business need, but at the same time, still keeping commercial implications in mind and keeping in mind what does it actually mean to get to the market and to build this whole thing up. So where can you leverage a foundation which might already be there? And those considerations, they can be very individual for each company. It's very individual where you have people in-house, where you want to build up knowledge, where you want to control, but it's very important to make these decisions. Now, when we move to the next slide, we would like to look a little bit into what does that mean now when you think about how to build up your platform. And I would like to do that at the example of the backend, because that's the topic we usually deal with. And when you think about how to implement all these considerations into a platform setup, the first thing you stumble upon is definitely, if I want to distinguish per component, I need to have many different services. I don't want to have one big monolith. I want to cut it into different pieces. I want to decide per domain how I want to tackle the challenge there. So that's the first thing, cutting into different services. When we move to the next slide, then coming to our topic of build or buy, then the next step is deciding what makes sense for you and your company to buy and what makes sense to build. So if we take a look on the results from the report, some typical components you might want to put into the buy box is DRM, encoding, packaging. So such things can be standardized, should be standardized. You can leverage what's on the market. There might be other components where you say you don't want to bother your team. You want to rely just on an SLA. You want to buy that in. So those are the services which are on your buy section. On the other hand, you might have services where you say you actually want to have freedom. You want to control what is in there, and it might be even a USP in the market for you to distinguish yourself there, and you need some flexibility. Typical services, as we saw in the report, is metadata management. So how to structure your metadata, how to have relations between the different assets. Entitlement is another topic. So how to set up business rules, how to think about permissions for the audience. Such services typically end up in the build section. And you see the question mark here because, of course, we are in the OTT space, and many of the components we talk about, they are used or built or bought for every OTT platform, but there might also be other topics you want to cover in your platform, connecting it with gaming, connecting it with whatever other services which might be different from other platforms. So you also need to have a possibility to realize such components and to have some platform which allows for such things. Then in the next step, that's the typical topic which comes up when you talk about microservices. It's nice to cut everything into little pieces, but in the end, you still want to have that connected. So if you think about which services do you need, if you think about which services to buy, which services to build, keep in mind, in the end, all of that needs to still be connected, because you want to have a possibility to have these different services communicating in the back end. You want them to be maybe connected to the same messaging bus. You want them to be able to exchange data. So it's important to have them connected in the back end. And on the other hand, we talk here about the example of a backend where you talk about encoding and metadata management, monetization, advertisement, and all such things. If you have that in different services, you might still want to have one management system, one interface where you can control all that. So to not end up in the end with 20 systems where the team needs to look into, you need to think about, if you have the different services, if you buy some services, if you build some services, how to get that all still in one management system. And last but not least, you might think about further integrations, of course. So there might be services which you know already now, which you want to integrate from third parties, from your own teams. There might be services in the future which you might want to integrate. So whatever infrastructure and architecture you're building up, you need to make sure that you have the APIs and you have the possibility, and it's meant for further integrations. And if you talk about, or if you take a look on all that, it can become quite complex, definitely, with all the different services, with different sources of these services, with different teams working on the services, and then integrations. So the better you can orchestrate all this, the easier it will be and the more future-proof and reliable it will be. So we see here also the need to have some kind of possibility to control and orchestrate that, and to handle overarching functionality like authentication, permissions between the services, all such things on an orchestration layer. That's the conceptual approach, how we see the considerations from the study being implemented in an OTT platform. I want to mention, of course, we took also these considerations and build up a platform, because the build or buy topic, and I would even call it rather build and buy topic, is crucial for us. We see that this is the way to go. This is the way to work with you as a media company to enable you and to enable your departments and to enable also your partners to take these services and control them and have control. So we have this mosaic framework where we implemented these considerations. This webinar is not meant to go into much detail here, but I would love to talk with you about it. So you can reach out and I would love to tell you a little bit more about that. But now, getting back to the topic of the webinar, Tom and I, we are here and we would be happy to answer questions you have and discuss with you a little bit how you see the build or buy topic in the OTT technology area. Tom will guide us through questions.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions that have come in. So the first one, I've got a question on the market sizing, which I can answer quickly. The market sizing was based on a separate set of research, which I can talk to in more detail if anyone's interested. My email is just there. It's about 130 companies that were summed up, and we looked at their products and revenues on that basis. But please just let me know if you'd like more information on that. One question, can you give some named examples of companies and their choices? What companies built using mostly in-house dev? I would be happy to talk in a bit more detail about some of the case studies that we've essentially run through, but I think it's probably better off of this call, because there's some of them probably need to be caveated in how I can address them. But there are certainly several companies that we talk to that have built significant amounts, if not everything, in-house, and after a multi-year cycle have decided to either start breaking apart their kind of monolithic in-house development, or have decided to kind of go wholesale out to the vendor community to buy as a package what they've learned, what they need. So I think there's a couple of different ways of companies going through that cycle, but over a longer period of time, it is a cycle. Companies build stuff in-house, then outsource it when they know what it is, and then insource it when it's not performing the way that they want it to. We've got another.
I can make add here from my point of view, or at least adding examples I can talk about because we work with them. There are companies in different sizes which decide for this, which decide to build up in-house teams and which decide to make a combination of build and buy. So on our side, we work, for example, with big broadcasters like Sky or CDF in Germany, with which both build up in-house teams for some components and take in help from vendors on other components. We work with Canela Media, Hispanic content. We work with Manza, which is a startup in the US with like venture capital-backed startup, which is right now growing quite heavily, and also decided from the very first day that they build up an in-house team and then leverage a foundation which allows them to take commoditized components in, because as a company in this phase, of course, they don't want to build up a new DRM service, but they want to have control about how to manage their metadata and how to set up this overall platform and how to control that and how to have the ownership also of the roadmap. So you see companies in all sizes and also regionally distributed which decide for this combination.
Great.
Well, interesting. Wanted to add that.
No. That's much more detailed than I felt comfortable giving. So that's really interesting. We've got another question here. Are there any specific core areas where platforms try to differentiate between their sourcing strategies? So I think this is referring to, are there different sourcing strategies for technology for maybe the back end or the front end components? And in general, yes, there are. There's a lot more focus on bringing in vendor components for commoditized technologies, and specifically, yeah, as I said before, problems that have been solved in the video streaming stack, where there are many more cases where we understand that technology very well, where we see a lot more variety in the way the way technology is sourced, is towards the front end and towards things related with control and analytics and data management, where it's a lot more complicated. Steffi, any additional thoughts on that?
Well, we saw in the study that there are areas which are typically being bought or being built. And additionally, I would say there are really differences based on where the companies want to put their focus. So also where they want to differentiate when it comes to like the customer facing side. There are companies, if you just take the example of personalization, there are companies who just say there are nice components out there. Companies or vendors put much effort into building that, and I will just use that. And I can rely on that they will provide something which is valuable. And there are companies who put up a team of 20 people just building the personalization engine because it's really crucial for them for differentiation. So yeah, what can be standardized, what should be open is one thing. The other thing is really very individual, where you want to put your focus and what is your business strategy.
Okay, great. Conscious of time, so we've run through several of the questions, but there are a couple more. If you have got a question unanswered, or you have a question that you'd like to ask, please send it through. Emails are just there. The chat is still open. You've got seconds left. But yeah, thank you very much for joining me, Steffi. I'll hand over to you to wrap up.
Also, thank you very much from my side. We will send you a follow-up email, which also contains the link to the whole study, if you're interested to read that. And yeah, we would be happy to get in touch with you and discuss the topics in a little bit more detail. Thanks for joining. Have a nice rest of the day or evening, wherever you are. Thanks. Bye.